There's a multitude of factors responsible for Dagestan's prominence on the world stage. The most obvious is the country's violent past. Most recently, Dagestan was conquered by the Russian Empire, and the subsequent centuries have largely been colored by their turbulent relationship with the various incarnations of Russia. In neighboring Chechnya, the situation with Russia and the Soviet Union has been even more tumultuous. During World War II, the entire Chechen ethnic group was deported en masse to Siberia and the Kazakh steppe because Stalin believed there was a chance they were collaborating with the Germans. Over 100,000 died. Many, who were too weak to travel, were simply shot in a spot. The whole thing was a callous, cold-blooded catastrophe for the Chechen ethnicity.
That day, they also killed my aunt, who lived in another village. She had simply gone to the stream to fetch water. The soldiers shot her dead and buried her right there. This is how we were rounded up, crying, in Zandak. We had no food at all. In the first months that followed our deportation, my father died. Then my two remaining brothers, who had reunited with us in Kazakhstan. My entire family died of hunger.
The Chechens weren't allowed return to their homeland until 1957. By then, the death toll estimated at over 100,000. The Chechen people have never forgotten that. As Chechen Olympic gold medalist Wenceslas Ziolkowski recalls, that is what we were raised on. These memories, all that pain, it makes a Chechen lose their temper in just a couple of seconds. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s, they saw that as their opportunity to follow other nations like Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan by forming an independent state. The result was the two Chechen Wars, which included the 6-week bombing of Dagestan in '99. In less than a decade, Russia reduced Chechnya's capital Grozny to a pile of rubble twice. Tens of thousands were killed, and the Second War ultimately ended in a Russian victory. In the hopes of avoiding a third Chechen war, a pro-Russian government was installed under a former rebel leader. As Schuster describes, with Russian tanks still occupying a region, the newly elected President Vladimir Putin chose a former rebel mufti named Ahmed Kadyrov to lead Chechnya, entrusting him to control the separatists by any means necessary. Kadyrov, as a respected spiritual leader, was one of the few men who could make the Chechens accept defeat and move on. But as you'd imagine, for many there was no moving on, and they fled to nearby countries like Dagestan, where they continue a campaign of violence against both Russia and those Muslims who accept Russian rule. The initial struggle, which was more about Chechen independence, has now become religious in nature and revolves around the formation of an independent Islamic state. From a 2011 BBC article, two men in camouflage holding Kalashnikov rifles enter the shop and tell the customers to leave. The terrified cashier stumbles past as one of the men puts a bomb on the counter and sets the timer. He does not bother emptying the till. He just walks out the door. Seconds later, the shop is filled with smoke. Attacks like this one caught on supermarket security cameras, in which Islamic fighters punish shops that sell alcohol, have become routine events in Dagestan's capital, Makhachkala. Attacks like that are carried out by young, disenfranchised rebels with a cause, many of them radicalized online. Young men taking their religion to militant extremes and joining rebels is known as going into the woods, and over the last couple of decades, it has been common in Dagestan. The Russian Interior Ministry stated that in 2013, there was a total of 399 acts of terror in the North Caucasus. Of those 399, 242 took place in Dagestan. And so in the Caucasus, there's a thin line between order and chaos. And for many, that line is wrestling and sports. And this is often used to a political end. As Karim Zidan noted, in an attempt to turn away from further warfare with Russia, Ahmed Kadyrov constructed a plan to divert Chechen youth from radical fundamentalism. And to find an alternative outlet for troubled young people's aggression, Kadyrov enlisted the help of the Saitev brothers. The Saitev brothers are Buvayzar and Adam Saitev. Buvayzar is widely considered the greatest freestyle wrestler of all time. He has 3 Olympic gold medals from '96, 2004, and 2008. He missed out at the 2000 Olympics, but his brother Adam picked up the slack in the Saitev household, snapping up a gold medal by defeating none other than Yoel Romero in a final. This guy is the reason Yoel missed out on gold. These guys are from Dagestan, but they're ethnically Chechen, and so considering their credentials, they were seen as the perfect fit to be the face of Kadyrov's sports socialization program. The purpose of the program was to divert the youth away from extremism by promoting sports as an alternative. The brothers would have encouraged participation in sports, and their elevated status within Chechnya would have given the youth something positive to aim for, a clear route to escape hardship. Success in sports will be rewarded with fame, money, and political power. A great message if you're trying to steer the youth away from going into the woods. However, being used as a political prop for a pro-Russian government couldn't have been easy for the Saitev brothers. During the Chechen deportation, their grandfather and 6 of their aunts and uncles died. These memories, all that pain, it makes a Chechen lose his temper in just a couple of seconds. In a cruel twist of fate, in 1996, while his family were at home in Chechnya fighting against Russia, Buvayzar was in Atlanta representing Russia, on the grandest stage and in the greatest fashion, by adding an Olympic gold medal to their stacked trophy cabinet. And so it was in this painful predicament that when interviewed by Russian television, he dedicated the victory and offered his solidarity to Chechnya. Up to that point, Russia had shown itself to me only through the muzzle of a tank. That's all I had seen of her. And so for the Saitev brothers, getting recruited to aid a pro-Russian government in placating a rebellious population must have been a difficult proposition. But this is the extent to which sports can be politicized in the region, how champions can be used to quell feelings of revolution and present the disaffected youth with an alternative avenue to channel their energy. Sports instead of war. As Adam Saitev puts it, wrestling is a way of controlling the masses. But while the primary purpose of the program was to offer the youth an alternative to extremism, a desirable side effect was that it would help endear a controversial leader to his people. And this was not unique to leaders. Rich oligarchs will happily pay for the privilege of association with national heroes in order to win the favor of a sports-crazed public, as was the case of Khabib's former benefactor, Ziolkowski Memorial. He supported Khabib with money and expensive gifts until he himself was whisked away on a luxurious, 5-star, all-expenses-paid trip to prison, courtesy of Vladimir Putin. I mentioned in a previous video that politics is the one profession so vicious it make a fist fight look like a Thai massage with a happy ending. Ruthless shit. Anyway, the main point here is that Ahmad's son Ramzan Kadyrov.
Его отец Ахмад Кадыров был муфтием Чечни и первым президентом республики. Погиб в результате теракта 9 мая 2004 года.
Is using sport as a way to help control the masses, support his administration, and nip revolution in the bud. And the cooperation of high-level, nationally revered athletes is an essential part of that strategy. I'm not at all placed to comment on the potential ramifications of refusing to cooperate with a man like Kadyrov, but I feel safe speculating he wouldn't be too fucking happy about it. So to close this video, Dagestan is a country whose history has been plagued by wars with massive, sprawling empires, as well as hosting innumerable smaller internal conflicts between the various tribes of the region, many of whom live in remote villages at high altitudes on rugged mountainous terrain. These harsh realities, in combination with its relative poverty, have produced a culture that demands toughness. And so the blunt process of toughening the fuck out of their kids begins at a young age. All this in a climate where sports is many different things for many different people. But at every level of society, it is of prime importance. For some, it's a political tool to direct the disenfranchised youth away from violent extremism. For that disenfranchised youth, it represents the most visible and accessible road to a better life. For others who have walked that road comes wealth, fame, and political power. And so at first glance, the gross overrepresentation of the region on the world stage of wrestling and now MMA is baffling. But when you consider some of the unforgiving factors at play in both the past and present, it's easy to see why Dagestan has become the Foundry of champions.